there was a, I mean, let's be fair to all sides. There was a condolence meeting in Bangalore, or Bengaluru now. And that was all. Nothing was held in Delhi. Not even a condolence message was sent to the family. The family spoke up later. And a lot of people had, if I may use the word, akhrosh. A lot of young writers, not so much me, let me be frank. And they had no avenues. They had no avenues to express themselves. And then the Hindi writer, Krishan Kumar returned his award. A day later, Nayantara Sehgal returned her award. And then I found myself in a very embarrassing position. People, Ashok Vajpayee had also returned his award. I asked one or two friends, frankly, I mean, I have no problems in mentioning them. I asked Ritu Menon and I asked Namita Gokhale, and I said, I don't think I should be just standing there and gaping. And they said, go ahead. I returned the award. First, I wrote a letter. Which went on the internet. And the next morning, I'm being very frank, I got a call from a senior, I will not mention the name or the office, senior member of the academy, कि दारूवाला साहब बड़ा pressure पड़ रहा है, इस वक्त आप कुछ न करें. Then I decided that the best thing to do is to actually return the award. Am I audible? Am I holding this? Am I audible? Okay. So that is the story. Now I feel that firstly, Dr. Kalburgi had got the Sahitya Academy Award. Next, he was a rationalist. I have not read his work, let me be very frank, but I am told he spoke against idol worship. You can speak against anything. He spoke against idol worship. I think he told the Lingayats that you don't really belong to the Hindu community. You actually predate the Hindu community in Karnataka, etc. But I am no authority or no scholar of Dr. Kalburgi's work. But that somebody rings his doorbell at 7 in the morning and he opens the door and the man is shot. And we were seeing in the papers that all three, Pansare Sahab, Dhabholkar Sahab and Kalburgi Sahab, all free thinkers, all rationalists, were shot dead. And there was no communal angle, no sectarian angle, if I may say so. They were shot by the majority community, shot them, they belonged to the majority community. And it was said to be a rightist sanstha. Now I believe, from what I read of the papers, that the police has found that the bullets came from one particular weapon, and the weapon belongs to an office bearer of the Sanatan Sanstha. And that is about it. So that the academy should not speak of writers. You see, I mean, no one is blaming the Natak Academy or any other academy. But an academy of writers not standing up for the writers, not showing placards, or if they don't show placards, at least voice it. And one or two answers to Nayantara Sehgal were very odd. I mean, one answer which came from the academy was that you have earned enough money from the award, which she hadn't. She was well known. I mean, she was well known. She had won a Continental Prize as a Commonwealth writer as well. I was present that time. That was in London. But there was no question of her earning any money. And I think the award that time was 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000. She returned this with a check of 1 lakh. And she said, I mean, if there any money is involved, here it is, twice as much, thrice as much, and that's it. So I felt compelled to return the award for the lethargy and, if I may say so, by implication, the callousness of the academy at that particular time. After our protest, they of course came out with all the right things as far as their statements were concerned. I hope that answers your question.
Professor Menon, many of the people who criticized Daruwalla Sahab and others who were returning the award said that you are insulting these institutions. You are insulting the national institutions which have said this. And there was this oblique reference to nationalism and national pride in saying that. And in recent days, we have seen some of the other more potent forms of that extreme nationalism. Recently, you've been in the middle of a place that has been in the middle of this controversy. What would you like to say to those sentiments? Not to those people per se, but to those sentiments, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I do want to say that I was very struck by the extreme violence of the reaction to award Vapsi. In the sense that it seemed like did we know that writers were so powerful? Did we think that writers have this kind of power that they return awards, and the anger that was built up against them, the violence of the words that were used against them, I suddenly realized, you know what? Academics and writers, we can do a lot. We are much more powerful than we think. So I actually felt so empowered when every morning I would open the paper and yet another writer was telling the current dispensation, what they thought of the kind of politics and the kind of hatred that was being produced. So I know that I felt extremely empowered. I was also struck by the fact that rationalism, which is not something that we thought had a very strong, it seemed like such a marginal ideology. There's a left ideology which is quite powerful, but rationalism is a particular kind of, direct attack on religion, which we would have thought was marginal. But 3 men were killed for that. So again, clearly they pose a threat. Writing and thought poses a threat to a particular kind of ideology in which, as you point out, the attempt is to close minds through invoking a certain kind of unquestionable deity. And that unquestionable deity is something that is called the nation, but it is defined in very, very narrow ways. So what do I have to say to nationalism? I think nationalism has historically actually acted to close minds. Nationalism has had its moment during anti-imperialist struggles. At that moment, nations were producing a certain kind of a ferment, but the tendency in all nationalisms is to solidify the dominant ideas as the nation. You see that whether it is India or Africa, Asia, whichever religion, whatever that form of the ideology is. In Turkey, it was secularism. So whether it's Islam or Hinduism or secularism or capitalism, which was, of course, the ways in which the European nations came into being, that ideology is produced as natural. It's produced as practically God-given. Even if it's secularism, it's like taken to be a completely natural thing. And there is absolutely no dissent permitted from what is produced as the nation. So no counter-narrative of the nation is acceptable. No marginal voices from the nation are acceptable. So clearly there is a way in which if we want to rescue nationalism as an ideology, we need to think about nationalism we need to rethink nations as more fluid and as embodying democracy. We need to recognize democracy as more valuable than nationalism, I would say.
Thank you, ma'am. And I would like to revert the same question to you with the added note that having served as a police in state institute, haven't seen them up close, do you think that despite the fact that, and I'll come back to you with this question, that despite the fact that nationalism can tend to close minds, do you find that there is some inherent value to it that is worth saving and worth tempering, perhaps?
I'm not sure. Just as the state Professor Menon would be knowing much better. She is a professor of political science. But what little I have learned as an analyst, a political analyst in the cabinet secretariat, I have found that the state has become a sort of well, not a dirty word, but the theorists don't take it as a great concept anymore. Similarly, nationalism went down after the Nazis came in. Let's not forget history. Let's not forget Hitler and Mussolini. I'm not talking of fascism, so please don't read meanings. Today you mention the word fascism and people immediately link it with a particular party. That is not what I'm trying to talk about at the moment. But when we are talking of a global village, when the world is becoming a global village, when the migrations are in millions and millions, look at the Syrians coming in, and where, if I may diverge for a moment, I'm amazed why Saudi Arabia didn't take in any Syrians, why any of the Gulf countries didn't take in any Syrians, and the Europeans welcomed them with open arms. I'm surprised, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. In this kind of a mahal, if I may, this kind of a milieu, how can you put a certain value on nationalism and patriotism? Even if you see the TV and the radio, now on 15th August or 26th January, you don't see Watan ki raah mein, Watan ke naujawan shaheed ho, and all that. And this shahadat is also a very odd concept. And if we leave it behind, because everyone becomes a martyr, anyone who is killed in any cause becomes a martyr. Those three intellectuals who were killed, poor chaps, they have not been known as martyrs. They have no claim to martyrdom at the moment. And I would like to tell you that I'm a member of Sarvodaya, where we celebrate Gandhiji twice a year. And a member of the family, I won't mention the name, told me on 30th January that you will see a day will come when 30th January will not be a day of martyrdom for Gandhiji, but will be a day of martyrdom for Godse.
Not sure I want to clap on that, but
I know.
Still appreciate the sentiment. Ma'am, as a political theorist, again, I would come back to the question of award Wapsi, but first, on this question of nationalism, it is true that nationalism, last refuge of the scoundrel, we all know that, but it's still something that's so potent. That is so, and it's not something that you would find only with BJP members. There are many people who will say कि भाई अब ये तो नहीं बोलना चाहिए था ना, ये तो मतलब अब देश को तो नहीं कह सकते ना. That sort of sentiment, that this is the common sense कि देश को तो नहीं कह सकते. So doesn't that common sense sentiment have any value? And is it what, if there is any way, what is the way to work with those sentiments?
So I actually think that the people who say that ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए था, etc., या ऐसा बोलना नहीं चाहिए था, I think there's a kind of nationalism which is the kind that Kanhaiya expressed in his speech, which we now know by heart. I've now heard it so many times, it's going on everywhere. It was going on again on NDTV. So this wonderful line, Bharat se nahi, Bharat mein azadi, that is a kind of nationalism which I think ordinary people would relate to. Meaning by ordinary people, I don't mean to say, I don't mean that in any kind of negative sense. I mean Aam Janta in that sense, that they would relate to it in the sense that we want to be here. This is our country, but there are huge amounts of problems with our country. There are all kinds of things that are wrong from which we want azadi. So all those things that he says, Samantwad se, or Pitrasatta se, or Manuvad se, and all those things. So you're actually it's a very interesting kind of left nationalism, to which I think a lot of people might relate, which is, this is our country, we want to be here, but we need to change it from top to toe. We need to really fight at every level. That is one kind of nationalism. And I think that kind of nationalism is something we could work with. Because there, I think, once you start the conversations, then the Bharat Se and Bharat may also open up other forms of dialogues with those who say Bharat Se. But I don't. That kind of nationalism needs to be developed. But what we see is a kind of nationalism in which only one idea is permitted. So, for example, I was thinking of this song which was cited by the judge when she gave Kanhaiya bail, right? Mere Desh Ki Dharti. And several people have been saying, and I've been thinking about this, that when we talk about nationalism, we don't think of let's talk. If you're going to talk about Hindi film stars, let's talk about another song. जाने वाले सिपाही से पूछो, have you heard it? कहाँ जा रहा है? मांस जलने की बू आ रही है. And so on. There are, I don't know all the lyrics, but it is one of the most powerful pacifist anti-war songs which recognizes that soldiers at the borders are sacrificing themselves. They are very brave, but for what? You see? So we need to challenge the kind of nationalism that produces certain unquestioned verities, so that to recognize, for example, that the armed forces are also a source of livelihood. In fact, they're largely a source of livelihood for very poor people. And in fact, officers' posts are largely vacant. I think we know this. I mean, not largely vacant, but there are a large number of vacancies. So if young men are going into this job, and they do it well, they do it to the best of their ability, and they sacrifice a lot, should we be celebrating that sacrifice, or should we be asking, what is this system which sets up a world in which our young men, one of the sources of livelihood they have is to sacrifice their lives? I think we need to ask those kinds of questions. So if we are going to work with nationalism at all, I would want to work with the Bharat Mein Azadi kind of model. But I do want to add, as a feminist, that feminists have a long tradition, along with many other honorable traditions, Ambedkarite tradition, Periyar from the rationalist and anti-Brahmin activist and philosopher from Tamil Nadu, Periyar, and feminists. All of us have looked at the nation state with deep suspicion. Virginia Woolf said, for example, a woman has no country. Kamla Bhasin has these two lines of poetry where she says, मैं सरहद पे खड़ी दीवार नहीं, मैं सरहद पे खड़ी दीवार नहीं, उस दीवार पे पड़ी दरार हूँ. This is the feminist vision. At the height of Kargil and at the height of every kind of Indo-Pak state-to-state masculinist parading of testosterone, feminists have always been speaking to one another across borders, across Pakistan, across Bangladesh. There's a very powerful, strong South Asian women's movement and a very powerful, strong South Asian peace movement which opposes the nuclear establishment in their own countries, which opposes patriarchy and and capitalism in their own countries, and we are in conversation. So I would actually think I would want to think in terms of not globalization, but a kind of socialist-inspired internationalism, which goes way beyond the nation.
We'll come back to the question of the women's movement, ma'am. But for now, coming to the criticism of the award Vapsi, again to you, sir. Many people said that this is not the first time. That we agree that what happened was bad, but this is not the first time this has happened. And this has happened before too. And you were very careful in your letter where you wrote that you had disagreements with UPA too. This has nothing to do with party. Even Arundhati Roy said that this is nothing to do with party. But the critics still say that this happened at a particular moment when the BJP had come with a historic mandate. And this was a leftist conspiracy to dent the image, vagara, vagara. So how would you react to those criticisms? And do you think that despite those criticisms, there is some truth to the fact that there was a historic moment that unleashed certain forces which now we need to respond to? Do you subscribe to that, or do you think?
Can I have a long answer to that, if you don't mind?
It's your...
We went as probationers and met Pandit Nehru in the Prime Minister's office in 1958, must have been December. And he was sitting there at 11 o'clock, totally tired, exhausted, fatigued, 11 in the morning, mind you. And his cap was on the table, and there was a thin white ring round his head, otherwise it was bald. And we came from the rear, and I thought he looked more like Gandhi than Nehru, my first thought. And the first thing he said to us was that in one's youth, everyone is a leftist. I'm not. I'm neither here nor there. I'm a centrist. But he said in one's youth, everyone is a leftist. So see to it that you don't knock their service chances when they go through the UPSC or the PSC. So in verification, don't consider this as a blot on their career, on their character. So that was a perception once upon a time. Today, anything to do with the left is supposed to be anathema. And the other thing I wish to say about nationalism is that it is being equated with one particular community, with one particular philosophy, and we can never agree to that. In 1962, I volunteered for the front and I was posted to the front in 1963. So, I mean, what are we talking of? And many of the people who are talking of nationalism, especially on TV, they would never have stirred out of their rooms or done anything for the country in a way. Your question was, the criticism came within 2 or 3 days. I mean, actually, the very next day, the finance minister said that this is a campaign against Mr. Modi. And all those who are already opposed to Mr. Modi are returning the awards. I think this was really going off the tangent. And I have written an article, I have some copies also, in a fairly right-wing magazine, where I have said that the government handled the whole thing ham-handedly. They could have called some of us writers and talked to them, seen to it that the investigation in the murder case progressed at an accelerated pace, and they should not have considered themselves as the other. We were not attacking them. I think they saw one or two figures from the family, let's be plain, Nayantara Sehgal, and they thought that this was a conspiracy against the party. It was not. And then what happened was in Dadri, that murder and the beef and false rumor, the whole thing started. And then there was no looking back. And they blamed us. What have the writers to throw at the establishment? All they can throw is their awards. They have nothing else to throw. So some of us threw our awards. And then the writers were joined by the singers, by dancers, by scientists, by, there was, I forget, there would be over 100 people who clearly returned their awards. And if writers won't stand up for the writers, who else will? So I do not think that most of us, 98% of us, had anything particularly at that moment against the party. But the circumstances played into the hands of the objectors. And the circumstances have their own way. They crop up just at the wrong time for the establishment. And that beef incident and Dadri and the statements. And I have not forgotten the statements in December 2015 when a minister, I won't name her, talked about Ramzadas and the other term which was used. And I don't let them forget it. In each article that I write, I mention that. So I think the whole issue was misunderstood and mishandled by the establishment, and I think it was for the good that they mishandled it.
Certainly. Now, Professor Menon, I would like to challenge you here a bit. Please please try to understand the subject position of the RSS intellectual, the RSS affiliated guy. For years, he's been in the wilderness. Only he, has been in the wilderness. He's been considered the fringe of the Indian intellectual class. And now, finally, they have a full majority government at the center, no 20-party coalition of Vajpayee ji. They have full carte blanche to do what they can. And they start with this, and one of the elements, which they say is the fringe element, starts even murdering people. They have a freedom to that extent. And now suddenly all these writers and intellectuals who have really no mass base start returning awards, and then the whole world is asking them what is happening, and all the people in the West are asking that ye kya ho raha hai, and Obama is saying that we need freedom of religion is important to India and all that. So the frustration is that finally we had a chance, and now why do you have to play spoilsport? Why can't you let us be for 5 years and see what we're doing, and what is your problem? Why do you have? So that is the kind of opinions, and which is what having said that, there are many people who say that what is the problem? Give them a chance. Maybe they won't turn out so bad. How do you respond to those people, and how do you respond to those people who